Hello. So thanks everyone for coming. We're gonna talk for half an hour about microservices. So I'm with three co-speakers, Anna Maria, Emmanuel Bernard, and Sébastien Stormacq. So I will let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Hello. So it's working. Well, I'm Anna. I'm a passionate application developer. I talked on two topics today, two talks. Well, I like to code mostly with Java, IBM Cloud, Docker, Kubernetes, these stuff. So yeah, mostly in this area is my expertise. So shoot.
Hey there, Emmanuel. Working at Red Hat. I've been doing a lot of data-related stuff for middleware, so that's where my history comes from, relational databases, and then dealing with your data when you move to microservices, stuff like that.
And oops, no, it's okay. And Sébastien, and the microphone. At AWS since roughly 6 years, and before that spending a lot of time working with developers, trying to inspire them using different technologies for different large software vendors. Some of them do not exist anymore. Some of them still exist with a blue logo or a red logo. And yeah, mostly working with developers.
Okay, so everyone, if you had any question to ask, just use on Twitter the hashtag #VoxPanel. I will be monitoring it, and so I will be able to ask your question to the speaker. So my first question is, what about cloud native, hybrid cloud, having private version of your own cloud? What do you think about?
Who wants to start? I have the microphone, so I'm obliged to start.
That would be a tough question right away.
I have an AWS logo on my shirt, so my answer will be straightforward. At AWS, we think that there are little advantage to go multi-cloud, so we prefer or we encourage customers to go over one cloud, but for a couple of reasons. One of them is that there is a learning curve to learn any cloud vendor. It might be clever, it might be Google, Microsoft, or AWS. There is a learning curve, and if you go multi-cloud, you have to learn multiple API, multiple systems. That's one thing. The second thing is that there is a high risk that you limit yourself to the common denominator between all these cloud platforms. So you take only the lower hanging fruits from different vendors instead of truly optimizing your application to be cloud native. And this is where you can get the maximum benefits in terms of price, in terms of scaling. If you dilute your resource across multiple cloud, for example, you cannot get the price discount that you can get from one single vendor. But that's our point of view, and I'm sure my colleagues have a different point of view.
Do you want to take it? Okay, so yeah, Red Hat really believes in the so what is called hybrid cloud, which is you will deploy to one cloud provider, probably multiple. That's what we see. I mean, our customers, they don't necessarily deploy the same app across cloud, but more like they will use, pick and choose the cloud provider depending on their needs and to have some sort of insurance policy. And they also have some of their workload in-house, and it's really a mix of all of that. What we're seeing a lot is Kubernetes has been this sort of standardization across to say, here is what would be the common standard to start talking and deploying an app and making sure I can deploy it in one area or another, one cloud provider versus another. To me, I've been too scar-burned from the vendor locking era, so I'm not sure I would totally be on board with your answer. But I do see the velocity, I guess, aspect to some of it.
So I agree with you on the fact with the vendor lock-in. I think this is one thing that a lot of companies and a lot of developers want to avoid nowadays. And speaking of cloud native, I think that you've heard about the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF. They have a lot of projects under their umbrella, so those projects are meant for everyone to, to work on every cloud offering, every cloud offering that is adhering to that foundation, of course. And given the amount of projects over there, so if you go on the website, you can see projects based on the maturity over there. Most of those are community-driven, and you can see that there is an advantage in being cloud native and hybrid cloud. Why not both in the same time? So on multiple cloud environments, you have this ability to shift your workloads as long as you are adhering to a set of technologies that are open source, that you know that a lot of people are contributing to that, and you kind of have the assurance that they're going to be there on the market on the long term. They're not going to be disappearing tomorrow from this scenario. Yes, there is a learning curve when you are aware of multiple providers or multiple clouds, yet you can pick only what you need, what you need from those providers. So if you're going multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, you're doing that for a reason. There is a reason behind that, not because it was, I don't know, fancy to have 2 or more providers over there. Probably that was the best that fitted for your scenario, for what you had to build within your platform over there. Same for the one cloud approach.
Okay, thanks. Do you have any advice or experience to share from going from a monolithic architecture to a microservices one?
So I got one which is probably going to be different from these guys. So I want to be somewhat complementary. To me, on the technical aspect, one big complexity is the data. Splitting your code into smaller code base is one thing. Making sure you don't rely on one big database to access them, or to have them access all of that one single database is really the longer journey. But the good thing is that there are patterns to help you along the way. So it's really a journey where you start with a monolith and you start to extract some information. Maybe it will be a data copy of the stuff that matters. Maybe you need a virtual database sort of approach, will give you some sort of a virtual model of a subset of the data you have in your legacy database. I find it very interesting to not go all in, like, okay, I'm switching on my microservices thing or off, right? So you go one step after another. So there's plenty of aspects. Change data capture is another approach to help around that. So that's my data hat on it.
And from monolithic to microservices, well, one thing is that, you're splitting the complexity, right? And this is why you are going to microservices, to have a smaller amount of complexity in those small applications that you're building over there. So this is one key factor to be taken into account. This was the reason why you're going for microservices, right? And it's not just because, we had just one big fat jar and we thought of like splitting that into smaller jars, accessible at different endpoints. So this would be, I think, one of the best things to look at the domain, to look at how you're going to split that complexity and be happy with that. Of course, there's also the data part. And yes, building applications is easy. Managing the data in the back is hard. And actually synchronizing data, because, microservices, each of those are going to have its own persistent store, say so. So you have to think on way and synchronizing that data. Also, you're shifting from the mentality of reusable, because this is where monoliths were very strong about, was promoting the reuse. You were all the time thinking with the reuse paradigm. Now you're thinking with, doing one thing good. So you're focusing on that complexity you want to do over there. We're not thinking of so much on reusability anymore. So that's another point of view on migrating.
That's two compelling technical arguments, and you heard many other technical arguments during the day as well. So let me take a different perspective as well. It's the human factor, and at Amazon it was probably the biggest change is to change the organization and the team and the mentality and the philosophy, to have small teams that are independent from each other, that are building things independently, having their own roadmap, their own tools. So technology was an important aspect, but it's much deeper than that. Going to microservices is also adopting a different philosophy, a different structure of the organization. And we talk about large banks that are very centralized or doing things the same way since 20 years or more. And this is the thing which is more difficult to change most of the time, more difficult than the technology.
Yeah, And one small thing is that how do you start that journey? Depending on your organization, maybe you will decide, okay, I see 10 people really willing to give it a try, so I'll create a bit of a smaller team, giving that a try in 1, 2, 3 microservices, and then move on, see if the rest of the organization is starting to be convinced of the benefit without too much drawback, right? So you cannot go against your organization. That's what we were discussing as well.
Yeah,
and starting with new project, it's easier than starting with legacy. It's obvious, but sometimes repeating the obvious is good.
Yeah. So microservices give you a lot of flexibility and so on, but what's the cost? Because everything has a cost.
Okay, once again, I have probably a biased view towards my world, and you will have different opinions. But what we see, it's all customer adopting, not necessarily microservices, but cloud-native architecture and really taking advantage of public cloud platform, can see dramatic cost return. And you know Udemy, no, sorry, the other one. You know Cloud Guru, the website that provides trainings, cloud trainings. This guy migrated from a quite monolithic application running on virtual machines to something fully serverless. And just for the compute part, they reduced their cost by 80% in a few months. Last week I was talking to a French customer. You certainly know the brand, at least if you're living here. It's called Bon Duel. It's the green peas and the haricot and other beans. Thank you, and other vegetables. They also saw massive cost reduction after migrating. So usually when you migrate to the cloud, you do first a lift and shift. You take whatever you have running inside and you run them in the cloud. You don't have too much benefits of doing that. And then you start to re-architecture and take advantage of containers, of serverless, of cloud storage, managed database and stuff like that. And this is where you can see a massive cost reduction. Most of the time, 70%, 80%, 90% cost reduction. I have tons of other examples, but I want to give you a chance to answer as well.
So one thing within some of our customers that are really embracing this approach of, say, container-driven deployments and so on is they were going at it not only as, okay, let's have this flexibility, but also let's improve the density of applications being deployed on that node to also cut a bit on the operation aspect, which was a bit there was a bit of a counter curve when you say, okay, I'm going to have one monolith and deploy 20x or 50x. That's what I was discussing this morning, right? The fixed cost of each of those deployments might have an increase in memory usage compared to this one monolith that was doing everything. So they have been working on having a journey of realizing that problem and trying to compensate for it. Many different solutions. Moving to different technology was one of them, or finding better solution in their technology space. But that was a key aspect to say this potentially finite resource, but not infinite credit card aspect is going to be, it has to remain viable. So we need to find a bit of a medium term. So trying to make each deployment fairly cost effective was a key aspect.
Well, since we talked about the human factor and about this, microservices come with the great advantage that on the long term, it's easier for you to have a smaller team of developers or better focused developers and happy developers, because it's also it's the reduction of cost in terms of cloud cost or vendor cost, but it's also the cost of those that are building the microservices, because they're not people that will require, training. There are people that will do their work with pleasure. They're going to be challenged they're going to feel challenged when working on such an architecture. So there's also the people advantage that are happy with what they're working, and you're not actually as an employer, you're not wandering on the streets or searching for people to work on this type of architecture, and people saying, no, I don't want to work on this. I'd rather do something else that's much more safer. So on the long term, I think that one thing that impacts the cost is also the human factor, and also the fact that people are more happy when they're working. I think that they're more happy when they're working with a modern architecture, when they're working with model technologies, when they're working with the cloud. Now everything's on hype with the cloud, to be honest. So, yeah.
Just one more thing on the potential cost is we've seen team going bananas on, hey, I can do one microservice in one language, another in another tech, and I'm like, it's like Babel level polyglot, right? And teams are like moving back because when the lead developer deciding to go for this obscure language just left, it turned out that it was not so fun anymore. So there is a little bit of a rationalization. It will still remain polyglot overall, but I think there will be a bit of a maturation on which platform or language people are going to target their microservice for a given for a given shop.
Okay. Regarding microservices, what about security? What important points you have to have in mind when you are designing them? Security or in performance, let's say.
I feel you happy to give me the mic. Okay, might sound marketing, but it's true. Security is the #1 priority of our customer, of you guys, and us as well. I think there is no big change between microservice and traditional application. In terms of security, security is still important. Security still should be your first priority. All levels of security, network, data protection, identity and access management. Maybe the tools are going to change and the way you are going to implement these tools. But at fundamental level, come on, it's still IT, it's still software, it still requires good developer that provide sensitive default for your configuration.
And to me, it's going to be moving up the stack. So you don't want to have to maintain all of the CVEs from, well, you explained that very well in your presentation, from all the way down to the OS to the actual framework you're using. So by having your platform, whatever that is, knowing the framework you're deploying or the stack you're deploying and being able to proactively either respin the app with a newer version that is fixing that security problem, or at least alerting you is a key aspect.
Well, we're talking about security, and we come with a lesson learned with security. However, in the past years, we see, all of us see in the papers that the hackers are becoming much more aggressive. There are always ways to hack around and to go into our application, so we don't feel that safe anymore when we are developing. So one key factor regarding security is keeping up to date with what's coming on the market, and also get constant training on security as a developer. I know this might sound a little bit boring, because I'm going through that every year, but I'm seeing differences in those trainings, because things shift and there's always new ideas when it comes to how to gain access to what you're having over there, and there's nothing to be joking around when it comes to that. And you don't want to be the developer that works on the application or the platform that made the news. So, unless you want some celebrity, of course. But it's very difficult. Yeah, I know that bad advertising is also good, but not sure for a developer. But, I always had this thing back in my head, like, I don't want to work on this kind of app that might one day be hacked. So, like, I'm having it back in my mind, like, I have to make this secure first, as you mentioned. And afterwards think on the beauty of the code patterns and all the other stuff that I'm going to use over there, because in the end it doesn't matter how beautiful you wrote the code. It won't bring any good to the person that is suffering based on that. And we've been in the place. I've been in the place of the person whose data was stolen because used a certain service, or I gave my data to a certain service, and I didn't feel that great when I was notified, well, we've been hacked, your data is out there, please change your passwords and all these stuff. So you don't feel that great as a user, so try to put yourself in the shoes of the user when you are working on microservices, or actually when you're working on an application, regardless of architecture. Try to put yourself in the user's shoes and think, like, would I want for these things to get out in the world, or to be known by others. We all like our privacies, I hope. We don't want to make that.
Yeah, so one small aspect to that, so we know GDPR and so on, so there's probably a much more higher level of understanding about data hygiene and realizing that because we go from one monolith with one database which had everything into a queue of different versions of the same data copied over in one form or another because of the microservices isolation, you really need some sort of higher level tools to help you clean up whatever you no longer need and keep track of how you've moved the data and evolved the data or copied the data rather than move in practice.
Yeah, so I have a Twitter question from Emmanuel Goldstein. We have talked a lot about the technical aspects of microservices, but the interfaces and boundaries are very important too. What are your experiences when defining interfaces and boundaries of microservices?
Yes, that's very true. So domain-driven design is really massively helping in that area. To me, it's try and fail and try again, right? And evolve. You will mess up your boundaries. That's just a fact. That's why I was describing this virtual database layer, because it helps you make mistakes at the boundary level without actually have moved the data and then having to move it back again in some shape or another, like a disaster in the making. So try and learn. Over time would be my sort of obvious try.
One of the things we are doing at Amazon in terms of API design, which is part of the interface question, is not the only part. Data is important as well, but that's a discussion I had with one of you during one of the break, is how a very large decentralized organization can ensure some level of uniformity for API design. And what we have created, it's small teams of people that, in addition to their responsibility, most of them it's senior engineers, like principal level engineers, they are the API bar raiser. And whenever a team wants to release a new service, a new API, they have to go through an API review with a couple of selected API bar raiser to ensure that that team, that new service, is raising the bar in terms of API, following best practices, the things that we learn over the time, and to provide some level of consistency. I know that we are not perfect and there are many things to improve, but at least provide some level of consistency in our API from one service to the other. And so that goes back to the organizational question earlier as well. I wanted to add something about bar raiser API. Yes, the important thing about API and service is once an API is out there for your customer to consume, you have to think it's there forever. You cannot deprecate an API. You cannot change an API or make incompatible change to an API. So of course you can add layers, you can add different entry points or add a new API. But once an API is out there in the nature, it's there to stay forever.
Regarding your try and failure, I have to add something. We added something in the team like, okay, try, fail fast, and fail cheap. So, well, we're always open to experiments, as I mentioned earlier today. Experiment more, learn from that experiment. It's an experience gained. But coming back to the question regarding boundaries and defining interfaces, well, there is no right recipe for that. But again, you're very right. It's about communication, and when you are defining this, you're not involved. You're not just in your spot over there with your small team, and you're doing one thing, and the others are just isolated somewhere else and doing their own thing, and then you're coming all together and you're clashing, and it's like, oh, oops, we didn't define this accordingly. So, one of the key aspects that I've learned from is that, until we established the right communication across teams, we didn't find that very nice way of working. And you get to the point that you feel comfortable in making changes, and I don't know, you have trust in your team first of all, and secondly, you gain more confidence as long as you're keeping transparent communication, and you can get that with a small team and with a large team, and you can get that cross teams. But it takes, actually, it takes people, and it takes people open to have the same attitude and go towards the same goal. And even in a microservices architecture, I think everyone should be aware of what they're trying to build over there. So everyone should be aware what that platform that they're building is actually going to do in the end. What's the big purpose of that? As long as everyone is aligned on that and is aware of that, there's not just an isolated case that is managing microservice X, the other one microservice Y, and it's this kind of structure, like everybody does their work in their little shell over there, and they're never overstepping it over each other. Everything's fine, it's isolated, and it's great. It's not like that. Everyone knows towards where they're rowing. So we're all rowing in a team like that, and we're rowing to the same end goal.
So can I ask one question, which is, so in that model, so one of the difficulty I see of like trying to coordinate teams, so like this famous team of teams, is like being able to, because one aspect of microservice is to not treat the service as the project that you end, but really as a product that you keep having, right? But then there is this political game that is going on when somebody says, oh, I need more people on my microservice or my set of microservices. And then the organization evolves over time, and you need to shift the resource people away from that and working more on that, because this is the most important aspect right now. How do you shift those people, and how do you realize the priorities and accept that? So one key aspect is have clear goals for the organization, that's true. But that is one of the challenge of microservices, which could end up creating small fiefdoms of power, I guess.
Well, I think that way everyone is striving towards the agile model, that where priorities shift week after week or 2 weeks after 2 weeks, and we're kind of used to that. But yes, sometimes there is a different need for a certain microservice and or towards a certain area, and you need more people allocated to that. However, that shift should be easier, and I've seen that pair programming is actually going really well when you're trying to do this. Also, if you're all using the same development processes, the same practices, it's very easy to shift across microservices. It's not like the other ones were doing something so totally different from what you were doing on the other side. Of course, it was for a different reason what they're doing over there, but again, it's not a huge difference in what the other teams is doing. Secondly, if you're shifting people, but the other microservice is working with a total different technology, that's another topic. Because if you're working with multiple technologies in your microservice architecture, you need to be aware that are your developers ready to embrace any kind of, technology that you are putting there on the plate? It depends on how many you're putting over there, because if you're talking only about Java frameworks, I think that every Java developer is feeling comfortable on shifting from, Spring Boot to microprofile and so on. So it's comfortable for us. But if you are like putting, Java developer on a Go base or Python microservice, it's not going to be as comfortable as that. So it will take some time for that developer to adapt to the new paradigm over there. But again, pair programming is helping a lot. And if everyone is doing test-driven development and pair programming across the whole teams, well, it shouldn't be a problem in getting there. And of course, communicating and be mindful to the colleague. Yeah, there's a question in the public.
Yeah, I think the question you asked actually is a bigger question, and someone mentioned it earlier today. I think when moving to the microservices architecture, there needs to be organizational change. It's not just technology change. So Conway's law, we need to adapt to that. And I think from a financing perspective also you need to change, because you're moving from financing things as projects, so I will give you this much money and you do this project and it's done, to long-running budgets to support product teams. And I think it's not only a technology change. I think without a proper organizational change, the architecture is going to fail by itself. I think it's bound to fail.
I agree, and back to the security aspect as well. To me, it's a massively good thing for the industry to go from a project-driven thing to a product-driven thing. Yes, financially speaking, that's a bit new. Well, at least in France, it's like, ooh, what are you talking about? Like a project living forever. But that's important. I think the whole idea of I'm writing that stuff and then I'm gone with it is just fundamentally wrong in our industry, and we need to go and teach our leaders to understand that aspect.
Yeah, time is over.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so I got a few questions regarding Kubernetes, which seems to be an unfriendly beast, dealing with tons of YAML files. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, but that's why I was talking about abstracting away from the framework or the platform. At the end of the day, yes, whatever will just generate poops out, YAML files for you. But you will, as a developer or as an ops team, have higher levels of semantic than what we have right now. That's definitely progress. But the reason why people standardize around Kubernetes is also the fact that it's fairly low level and you can build blocks on top of it. So there is a reason why there is a bit of a convergence in the industry around it. So give it time, but well, that's my answer, or my hope, I guess.
Okay, so thanks everyone.
I'm gonna stay around a little bit, so if you have other questions, we can exchange.